Hello, good evening, and welcome to Prologue. Thank you for joining us. I am Mary Bradley. I'm the Development Director at WHQR Public Radio, and we're excited to have a great author with us tonight. If you have questions, please just put them in a Facebook comment or in the Q&A section of Zoom. But let's get right to it, and I will introduce Ben Steelman. Hello, Ben.
Well, Mary, thank you for having us once again. Our speaker tonight grew up in Ohio, but spent a good chunk of her childhood summers on Hatteras Island in North Carolina. Later lived there for a time. She's an accomplished writer with degrees from Ohio University and West Virginia University. She has been received honorable mention in the Pushcart Anthology and Best American Essays. Her work has appeared in Michigan Quarterly, Los Angeles Review, Front Porch, and Barely Southern Review. Her first novel, The Baddest Girl on the Planet, was published earlier this year by Blair. Please welcome Heather Frese.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
First of all, first question, are we pronouncing your name right?
You are, you got it, you nailed it, Frese.
Okay. All right. So basically, where did Baddest Girl come from?
Baddest Girl was, gosh, so when I think about it, and I think about this because I recently did an event with my college professor, my creative writing professor, and she had us do in my very first creative writing course, exercise in setting. And I wrote about these two little girls who met on a sand dune, and their names were Evie and Charlotte. And they met, at campsite P68 in the Frisco National Seashore Campground. And it was a little paragraph, but somehow that really took hold of my imagination. And so I was writing about them more and more. And eventually Evie became the protagonist in this book. So much of it was inspired by Hatteras Island and my time there, and the interesting, sort of fascinating nature of the place itself. And then also sort of those little girls that I first wrote about in my very first creative writing workshop.
Yeah, you start off, as I noticed, in 1999, just right before the Hatteras Light gets moved.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, and carry on from there. Mm-hmm. Trivia question: how just get the ball rolling on sense of place? How would you say that Hatteras is different from, say, Raleigh, or Toledo, Ohio, or whatever?
Right. Pretty much about as different as you can get. I think the thing that like really took hold of my imagination when I started to write this book was trying to imagine what it would be like to live on Hatteras Island year round, because I grew up there, going there on vacation, and it's quite different from Ohio and from Raleigh. It's very isolated. Like, it's literally, you all know, you're from Wilmington, you know the story, but it's out in the middle of an ocean, like they say, life on a sandbar, and they're not making that up. It's literally a sandbar. Once you cross that bridge and go down there, there's no fast food, and there's not a movie theater anymore. It's isolated, and it's unique. It's out there in the middle of the ocean, and it's beautiful. Like, it's just got this exceptional kind of extraordinary beauty that you don't see hardly anywhere in the world. I've never found anything to compare to it. But it's got this own sort of vibe to it, and also really interesting sort of dynamics between people who are there as tourists and the people who live there. And that's kind of what got me started thinking about it. Like, I really started thinking about, like, what would it be like to drive down Highway 12 every single time you had to go somewhere? You drive up and down that same road, that one road to get to the grocery store, to get to anywhere. And if you want to go to McDonald's, you got to drive an hour and cross a bridge or two and go up to Nag's Head. So yeah, it's definitely very different from basically anywhere that I've ever thought of. And the barrier island part of it is super fascinating to me too, like the way that it moves and changes in a way that you kind of don't get in Ohio. Like, buildings and roads tend to stay put, and on the Outer Banks it's not so much. You get a good hurricane and motels are in the side of the, in the middle of Highway 12, and you never know. And in the lighthouse, like you said, it started in 1999. And that was so fascinating to me because it's this lighthouse, that I think of as this sort of symbol of stability and safety. And they just plucked it up and they moved it. And like, that just kind of latched onto my imagination too.
No permanence. Well,
No permanence.
your protagonist Evie sort of starts that way, but when we meet her in 1999, her mother has sort of, at least temporarily, run off with one of the engineers who's moving the thing. So she is spending most of her time living in a mobile home with her grandma. Is that right?
Her aunt.
And her aunt is rather a character. Tell us about her aunt.
Aunt Faye's one of my favorites. She's eccentric. She's original. She's I think at the time of that chapter, she's living in that her camper van while she's trying to find a new house or something. But she's sort of camping out in the National Seashore Campground for as long as they'll let her stay. And then when they boot her out, she moves to another campground and then she comes back. But yeah, Aunt Faye is sort of she and Evie are close though. Like she's this like I said, kind of this eccentric person, but she understands Evie in a way that sometimes maybe her mother and her own family don't quite get her as much as Aunt Faye does. So they're they have each other's backs and they're good for each other. But yeah, she's an interesting person.
Yes. Anyway, and as we follow Evie, she goes off to East Carolina to college for basically one semester, gets pregnant with her high school boyfriend, marries him, breaks up with him, has possibly the worst postpartum experience of any woman in the Western world. I told someone that I think that this particular story you wrote should be a mandatory high school reading in those Scared Straight courses where they make the kids carry the 5 pounds of flour around to simulate parenthood. I mean, this would scare most kids I ever know out of having children ever again.
Right. Yeah, she didn't have an easy go of it, and that's what I thought was. I wanted to let her, she grows up kind of wanting to both escape the island and she also loves it, but like she wants to get out. She wants to go explore the world, and so I had her like go off to school, and like she thinks she's made this break and she's getting away, and then it just goes. She gets pregnant and she moves back home, and like she's there. Kind of stuck back where she was with the same people all around here who kind of view her, or at least she thinks that they view her as this certain way, as this certain girl, and that's what she has to kind of come to terms with. And yeah, her postpartum experience is not all sunshine and roses. When I was writing that part, I kind of thought to myself, like, man, if there's ever any woman who's a candidate for having a big case of postpartum depression, it's Evie Austin. Like, she is not in a good place right then. So I tried to get that hopefully accurately. And I wrote that before I had my own children. So I was just making that up.
Anyway, you are a proud mother of 3. I'll bite and ask, how did your experience of pregnancy and motherhood compare with Evie's?
I was pleased that I got most of it right, and then like I could have made it so much worse. Like it was not. Also, it was a bit of a transition, but yeah, it's better now. They're older.
That's good. Okay. Let's compare and contrast your 2 characters there. Evie,
okay,
who goes into real estate and for a little while has a sort of an affair going with her much older boss, and her friend Charlotte, who really does go off to another corner world. Can you talk to us about them?
Yeah, Evie and Charlotte's relationship is one of my favorite parts of the book. I think a lot of the story and the narrative focuses on Evie and her romantic relationships, but I really think this friendship between them is the big love story in the book, at least to me. Evie and Charlotte are very different people, and they meet when they're little. That summer that Evie's camping in the National Seashore Campground and the lighthouse is getting moved. That's when they meet and become friends, and then they stay connected. And Ohio, Charlotte is from Ohio, and so they don't live in the same place, and so they have to work at it. Like they have to write letters, and they call each other, and of course they visit every summer when Charlotte comes down, and their friendship kind of endures. But it also has its rough patches and rocky spots, especially when they, like you said, when they end up in these very different places in their lives, when Evie is a young mother and working and divorced, and Charlotte has gone off to college and graduate school, and she's teaching poetry and, talking about pedagogy, grading papers, and they're just very different people at that point. And at one point they kind of wonder, like, do we stay friends? Do we break up? Like, is this even going to work? But in the end, it's sort of this, whatever the sort of initial kernel inside themselves that bonds them together, they kind of realize that they always have that inside of them, no matter how much everything else changes. They still have that connection to lean on. And I think it's just one of my favorite relationships in the book. One of my favorite things to write about.
I'll ask you another unfair question. Who are you closer to, Evie or Charlotte?
Oh, as a person? Oh yeah, I'm definitely more Charlotte. Yeah. Evie says and does things that I wouldn't even think of until, weeks after the fact. And then I would wish I said it and did it. And, Charlotte's more of an academic, and, she's sort of, she's the artistic academic, kind of a little bit snobby, and like I'll admit to that. That's more definitely more along the lines of my own personality than Evie's, but I like Evie a lot. She was a lot of fun.
Mary, I see we've got a couple of questions flowed in. Shall we turn things over to the listeners for a moment?
Yes, why don't we? We've got a couple questions. The first one comes from Jessica, and she says, did you do any geographic or environmental research to prepare for writing the setting, or was it all from observation?
Yeah, well, a lot of it was from observation, from being there in the summers when I was little. But then, like, I did a lot of research. I did pretty much always have a tab open on my computer where I wanted to make sure that I got things right, because I really wanted to do the setting justice. I didn't want to, like, it drives me crazy when there are, books or movies that are set, ostensibly set on the Outer Banks, and then it's, filmed in Savannah, or they have the wild horses running in Rodanthe and the wild horses are not in Rodanthe. It makes me crazy. So that kind of stuff. And then I did, I kind of like to sprinkle, I don't know if I did as much in this project as some of the others, but like the science of barrier islands is really fascinating to me. And so I would look into that a lot and kind of use it metaphorically. And then I have just another example, like I have a lobster metaphor in there in one of the chapters. So I learned a whole lot about lobsters and their sex lives, all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I do tend to do a fair amount of research, but also most of it is just from having been there.
That was one of my favorite sections. I mean, somehow you seem to be comparing the reproductive habits of lobsters to Edie's personal life.
Yep,
and,
that's exactly it.
We'll let the readers discover that.
You just have to read it. It makes sense, I hope.
Any other questions, Mary?
Yes, we do have a few. Another one comes from Barbara, and she says, are the people in the book based on people you know, or possibly yourself?
I think as a fiction writer, to be honest, I am always kind of absorbing things from the real world, right? From life. And sometimes from things that happen, and sometimes from people you meet, and sometimes you hear a little snippet of dialogue and it's so fascinating, you work it in. But I will say, no one in the book is sort of an exact replica of somebody that I know. You sort of take these tiny little things that happen and weave it into stuff that you make up in your own head. And that kind of makes it more interesting. And so you take things and maybe like a little tiny piece of someone or something that they said, and you spin it into something fictional. So, and for myself, like like you said, like I can't say that nothing is based on who I am. Like your personality and your imagination comes into all of it. But yeah, like I said before, like I am nowhere near as interesting as Evie and as funny, and she gets into a lot more messes than I would. But that makes that's what hopefully makes it good reading.
Well, that actually leads into another question from Jessica, which is, are there parts of Evie's personality that you enjoy? Or, oh, sorry, no, that you envy.
Oh, that I envy. Yeah. Well, I do definitely enjoy almost everything about Evie's personality. She was hilarious to write. And that's sort of like when I started writing in her voice, like in her first person narration, like that's kind of what made the project take off. Just sort of seeing the world through her eyes was so funny and interesting to me. And things that I envy about Evie, yeah, like I said, like Evie, she doesn't sit back and let life happen to her. Like she's a very active participant in what she does, whether that's for better or for worse. Like certainly there are times when she should not be taking the actions that she's taking. And she's maybe makes bad choices, but she makes the choices. Like she doesn't just sit back and think about it. So that is kind of envious. I like her sense of humor. I think like she's really funny and kind of bright and kind of spiky and alive, and I love that about her.
Okay. Any other questions, Mary? I have one if you don't.
Oh, well, let me do this one. This one's a quick one, I think. Also from Jessica, why ECU? Was that a conscious choice?
Yeah, definitely. I kind of thought about, if I was a high school senior on Hatteras Island, where was I going to look for school? And I think that, you kind of, what I did was look like around my hometown. Like I looked kind of close by because I wasn't quite ready to, go states and states away. Some people do, of course, but I thought Evie would be more likely to get scholarships to somewhere in North Carolina, and she would maybe want to stick somewhere a little bit close to home. So I was trying to hopefully make that kind of a realistic choice of where someone who lives on Hatteras Island would choose to go to school.
You went to Ohio University, OU to France. Now that's rather famously where Walter Tevis, the man who wrote Queen's Gambit and Man Who Fell to Earth, taught for many years. Did you guys overlap by any odd chance?
I did not. I didn't. I had a lot of wonderful professors there, though.
That's good.
Connor and Daryl Spencer. Yeah.
All right. Obviously you did. But one other note, you have a lot of real material passing through here, of course, and you have a couple of odd appearances by real life people, one of whom, at least indirectly, is the boxer Mike Tyson. What is going on here?
Mike Tyson.
How do you get Mike Tyson linked up with Hatteras Island?
Yeah, so Mike Tyson, someone asked earlier about real life stuff, and Mike Tyson I was out to lunch with one of my good friends from Ohio University. We were just having like one of those nice long lunches, like before you have children, sit and like talk for hours. And she's kind of like sprinkled in this little anecdote about how Mike Tyson used to watch her do cartwheels. And I thought, what are you talking about? She said, it's just like really casually, slips in that, Don King had this training camp in Ohio. And it was right next door to her parents' house. And like, they used to watch him box. We used to watch him practice. And I was like, what? And so she was just like really heartbroken when all the kind of Mike Tyson, his reputation went south for lots of various reasons. I think it was just so fascinating to me. It just like really captured my imagination. And at the same time as that happened, I had been working on what I thought was just one short story. I wanted to write a short story about Evie. and how she came to divorce Stephen, because I knew they weren't gonna make it. And I knew she wasn't just gonna like roll over and let the marriage fall apart. She was gonna torch it somehow. And so as I was writing that, the Mike Tyson little anecdote came in, and it got me thinking. I was like, what if that had happened to Evie? Like, what if that had been something that she had run into? Because if she had met Mike Tyson and like she went back and talked about it on Hatteras Island, like that would not be something that would be easily forgotten. Like that would be something that everyone on Hatteras Island would be talking about for years, because it's so, out of the ordinary and interesting. And she definitely wouldn't have just been like dropped it casually. She would have made it into a big to-do, and like Mike Tyson would have been pretty much her best friend, and she would have talked about it. And then, when, the charges against him happen and all the stuff that goes wrong with Mike Tyson, that would have reflected on Evie as well. And people wouldn't have forgotten that either. So, and it was just this like interesting, funny, kind of off the wall situation that kind of came together. And I liked that Mike Tyson in that chapter was kind of representative of, fighting and conflict and all the stuff that's going on in Evie's marriage. And so that's kind of how I used him on a more metaphorical level. But yeah, definitely that was one of those weird little serendipitous accounts that ended up kind of sparking a whole book, unintentionally.
Things happen in real life that you can't get away with in fiction sometimes.
Right. Yeah, stuff like that happened, and they would say that's not believable.
All right. We mentioned that you have 3 children, ages 8, 6, and 3, which I think it may have cut into some of your writing time just a tad. But you also mentioned that now that they're getting into school age, you're starting to revise an old project that might turn into your second book. Are you in a spot where you can tell us about that?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I have. Last year was supposed to be the year that I started this, but then COVID happened and we were, homeschooling all year. So this year, everyone's actually in school for at least a little bit. I have like 3 mornings a week when everyone's in school. But yeah, so I'm working on this little project, and this is actually is in the same world as Baddest Girl on the Planet. It's from Charlotte's point of view, and it's a grief novel, and it centers on the time right after Charlotte loses her father, and she sort of runs away from home in a sense, and she comes down to Hatteras and stays at the inn where Evie's parents own and work at. And so she lives there and works there for a year. And it's kind of the 9 months that Evie is pregnant, and Charlotte is there kind of trying to deal with her grief and sort of what happens then. So trying to get that in shape.
Sounds like it has a lot of potential.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. From your lips to God's ears.
Whichever. Anyway, Mary, I see we've got one other question pop up on the board.
We do. And also I had one, if you don't mind. Heather, what was your publishing journey? How did you go from writing to publishing?
Yeah, definitely. So it was a journey. It wasn't a quick little step. I wrote most of this book when I lived in West Virginia, and I finished it, I don't know, 3 or 4 years I wrote it. And then I did have an agent for a while, and I had lots of kind of close calls with the bigger presses, but everybody liked it. They just didn't like it quite enough to publish it. So at the same time that was happening, I had gotten married and actually moved down to Hatteras Island. And in a very weird twist of fate, my then fiance got a job at an inn on the Pamlico Sound that I had kind of fictionalized in the books. So I ended up living there and working there for a year. And then I got pregnant and I had my first baby, and I sort of lost a little bit of momentum in submitting the project. So that was happening for a while. And then eventually, a few years later, I was sending out again to contests and small presses. And I came across the Lee Smith Novel Prize. And kind of during the course of my MFA, you get asked a lot kind of who you're writing in the tradition of. And I would always say, I'm writing in the tradition of Lee Smith. Like that's who I admired most and who I kind of emulated. And so I saw the call for the Lee Smith Novel Prize, and I was like, well, if that doesn't fit, I don't know what will. So I sent it off, and a while later I was in a McDonald's with 3 children. And I got a phone call from Robin Mira from Blair, and that's where I found out that it had won the Lee Smith Novel Prize and was going to be a real book. So that's kind of how it came to life. And then we had delays from COVID. I think it was pushed back several months, maybe even almost a year because of COVID. All my edits and revisions came in like right at the lockdown. Like it was something else. And then of course it released in March when everything's still been kind of virtual and stuff. But yeah, that's the journey, and it's been a trip, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. Everyone at Blair has been just amazing to work with, and I feel so honored.
Unfair question. What's your favorite Lee Smith book?
Oh, Fair and Tender Ladies. Yeah, Fair and Tender Ladies, no question.
Well, that is quite a journey, and I love that you ended up living the inn.
Yeah,
I mean, that's just crazy.
It was so crazy.
We do have a couple more questions. One comes from Barbara, and she asked, what's your writing schedule every day, in the morning, evening? I think she's trying to say, how do you do that with all the kids?
Right. Yeah, I'm a little bit more intermittent. I tend to kind of go in spurts, and I don't really have 6 a.m. I sit down every morning and write. I probably should, but right now I don't, because I'm too tired. So right now, when I have the 3 mornings when I drop off the little one at preschool, I just immediately try to switch gears and write for the entire 3 hours that he's there. And then I kind of don't touch much unless I happen to have time, where my husband has them or where they're all off somewhere, which hasn't been very often, especially lately with COVID stuff. But yeah, that's kind of it right now. And I expect that, hopefully I can get into a little more regular practice as they get older. But right now, that's how I'm doing it.
And here's a question from Jessica. If Baddest Girl were made into a movie, who would play Evie and Charlotte?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question and really hard to answer. I always pick someone kind of quirky for Evie. What is her name? I can't even think of her name. The one who she was Anna in Frozen, Kristen Bell. I was kind of thinking of Kristen Bell as Evie, only she'd have to be brunette because Evie's brunette. Charlotte, gosh, I don't know. Someone kind of quieter and more down to earth, maybe. Oh, I don't know. Anybody has ideas, type them in. I'm kind of bad at this game. But I'll go with Kristen Bell for Evie.
What do you read for fun?
I like to read. I kind of like to read literary fiction, honestly. That's literary fiction and memoir. That's kind of my go-to. Yeah, that's pretty much kind of like to read how I write.
Last book read?
Let's see. I just finished Between Tides, Angel Corey, also set partially on the Outer Banks. And I'm reading Hell of a Book right now by Jason Mott. And
of Wilmington.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, Mergers and Acquisitions by Kate Doty. I have that one kind of going on. Sometimes I have one that I read slowly and then in the background, and then others on top of it. I kind of tend to cheat sometimes, but that's what's going on right now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Mary, do we have anything else?
No, I think we are done with the questions. Just a big thank you, Heather. It's been really nice to meet you and hear about your book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate the review, and I appreciate being able to be here tonight. It's been great.
And we can't wait to see what comes next.
Yay.
All right. Well, I think we'll wrap things up at this point. We will be back in December, and we'll have an old friend back, Emily Collin. This will be a little bit different from Heather's book. Emily is now writing young adult dystopian fiction, and her latest book is her second in her series, and it's called Siege of the Seven Sins. And we have medieval combat and shapeshifters. I think it's almost Twilight Saga meets George R.R. Martin. So we'll see what happens with that. Thank you once again, and thank you, Heather.
Thanks, everyone. Good
And
night.
we will be back.